I'm a Sonic speedrunner, and I did not like Sonic Frontiers. I'm clearly in the minority, so lots of people have been asking for a video that details my issues with the game. I do think that this formula could work, and I hope that they keep it for the next game in the series, but this particular game felt unfinished and it definitely missed the mark for me. At first I thought it's because I'm 30 years old and maybe I just don't enjoy new video games anymore, but then I thought back to Tales of Arise, which allowed me to experience real joy. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 had me emotionally invested in the story and motivated to explore every single nook and cranny that the game had to offer me. So why did I dislike Sonic Frontiers? I promise it has nothing to do with my corrupted game files that caused the game to be literally unplayable, as annoying as this was. I'll break it down into a few key areas. The pacing in this game was very off-putting for me. Progression largely depends on collecting memory tokens to listen to short dialogue sequences, followed by more collection to listen to more short dialogue sequences. This loop of gameplay gets increasingly more frustrating as time goes on, at least for me. I found myself fishing for all of the memory tokens once I got to the final island to avoid this issue entirely. In addition, the flow is constantly interrupted during normal gameplay, whether it's long intro cutscenes for overworld bosses called Guardians that cannot be skipped, cutscenes whenever Sonic maxes his ring count, cutscenes for random meteor shower events, slow-paced minigames, and constant tooltips, which are enabled by default in the menu but thankfully can be disabled. The game also has a habit of occasionally locking you into 2D physics, and your only option is to either try to escape from the beginning of that 2D sequence or complete the segment of gameplay that could be upwards of 20 seconds or longer, and then you're free to travel once again. And speaking of travel, the lack of fast travel options are extremely surprising. In order to unlock fast travel in this game, you must first clear every map challenge, and only then can you travel between the various cyberspace portals. Your only other option to fast travel is to obtain an Elder Coco Scroll or Hermit Coco Scroll from the fishing minigame. This is in stark contrast to other open world video games. You are unlikely to have fast travel capability during a casual playthrough of the game, unless you're attempting to fully clear each area. Considering how displaced you often find yourself when you take a seemingly small detour to collect a memory token, it's quite unfortunate that the developers chose to take this approach. What they do offer you occasionally are rails that you can use as a sort of miniature fast travel, but that is no substitute for the real thing. I would have greatly preferred if you could teleport to any cyberspace portal once you've unlocked it at the bare minimum. Instead, you're forced to traverse the terrain, which is a largely uninspiring, undetailed, and barren landscape with an extremely limited color palette, in contrast to the vibrant and exciting cyberspace levels that are filled with so much personality. The overworld looks dim and lifeless. It's actually hard to believe that all of this footage was recorded with the same brightness setting. But hey, at least the motion blur effect is enabled by default, which helps to distract you from the lack of detail in the grass and other terrain objects. To break up the monotony of an overworld with absolutely no character, the overworld is filled with random rails and platforms that have the same design no matter which island you're on, to add to the lack of variety and detail present in this game. Seriously, this was such a missed opportunity to add some style to each island. To make matters worse, these platforms will abruptly pop into view once you get close enough to them. There is unfortunately no option to change the render distance in this game. This means that we are stuck with very possibly the worst pop-in to ever appear in a premium priced video game. Another thing that's uninspiring is the story. The bar was so low for Sonic games that this is being heralded as some sort of narrative masterpiece. Maybe it's because I've played other games that actually deserve this level of praise, but I am just not seeing it. The lack of terrible jokes was greatly appreciated, and the story does at least qualify to be called a story, but all the same, it largely fell flat for me. I felt almost no emotional attachment to anything that was happening with the characters, except maybe for Sage, but I felt like Sage was not explored nearly as well as she could have been. Eggman was almost completely unused, other than his highly predictable partnership with Sonic near the end. There was a lack of a true villain, there was not a single shocking twist, and the ending. Oh, good God, the ending. The first 3 islands built up some semblance of a real story, and then it comes crashing down in the latter 2 islands. There's a reason that the promotional material only ever showed the first 3. The 4th island involves climbing 6 towers with a tiny bit of lore about the ancient civilization that is given to you at the top of each individual tower. This lore was interesting, but it felt like a last-minute addition to the story that did not actually help move things forward. You could remove all of this information, and the story would play out basically the same. For what it's worth, I did actually enjoy the lore, but I'm bothered by how out of place it felt. The 5th island was extremely forgettable, but it actually had the best pacing by far because of the ridiculously inflated fishing rewards that allow you to collect all of the Gears and Memory tokens you could possibly need just by hanging out with Big the Cat for a few minutes. It caps off with a fight with the last Titan, Supreme. I knew that the fight with Supreme could not possibly be the final fight. The music, which up until this point had been phenomenal, was way worse than the previous Titan battles to the point that it was actually quite insulting. Surely, Sega wouldn't give the final boss a bad backing track. It's then revealed, unsurprisingly, that Supreme has a true form. As long as you're playing on hard mode, you can enjoy a final fight. The decision to lock this content behind a difficulty setting with 0 warning to the player is frankly unacceptable. If you're not playing on the hard difficulty mode, then unfortunately for you, the final epic and decisive battle between good and evil boils down to 3 QuickTime events. And then the game just ends. If you're fortunate enough to play the game on hard mode, then I hope you enjoyed the bullet hell hacking minigames up until this point. If you don't, then I guess that's too bad for you. I felt utterly betrayed by how the final 10 to 20 minutes of this game played out, and it has honestly soured my opinion of this game more than anything else ever could have. Now let's talk about combat for a moment. I didn't expect much from the developers when it came to combat, so the fact that the combat was about as deep as the shallow end of a swimming pool was expected and didn't really detract from my overall experience. Or at least that's what I'd like to say, but I can't. As you continue through the game, you will unlock various abilities on your skill tree. Most of these abilities, when used in combat, are attached to a miniature cutscene. I was so bored of these abilities before I even finished my casual playthrough that if it wasn't optimal to continue using them, I would have mashed X repeatedly instead. So you're probably wondering if I liked anything at all about this game, and I did. The music was by far the best aspect of this game, as is typically the case when it comes to Sonic games. The cyberspace levels were exciting and a great change of pace compared to the overworld sections. Sonic's movement was actually pretty good, and as long as you're not getting popped into the air by accident, which happens all the time, it felt pretty fluid. The Titan battles were mostly enjoyable, as were most of the Guardians, when I actually wanted to fight them and not be interrupted with their miniature cutscene. And most surprisingly, this is probably the best implementation of the horrible boost mechanic that we've seen so far in the franchise. Although I clearly do think that the core gameplay design works, the negatives hurt this game far too much for me to say that this was a great game or even a good game. It's certainly not a 10, it's not a 9, and it's not even an 8. If the ending wasn't so unbelievably disappointing, then maybe I could have called it a 7, but even that feels way too generous. So I'm sure that you're all wondering why I said at the beginning of this video that this was a good formula that could work. The developers were more ambitious with this game than they have been in a very long time, and I think this should be celebrated. They bit off a bit more than they could chew here, with the game trying way too hard to include way too many things, and the result was a game that unfortunately missed the mark in so many different ways. If they could fix some of the issues that I had with this game, then I could see it easily being the best Sonic game ever made. I promise I am not critical because I just want to hate everything. I'm critical because I care and I want the absolute best for the Blue Hedgehog. I do think the game, as it currently stands, has immense potential as a speedrun. So that's where I will be shifting my focus with the game moving forward. I am very excited to see what the community can put together in the coming weeks to months. I hope that this video adequately articulated why I didn't enjoy the game casually. Many people went in with zero expectations for a Sonic game, but I want much more than that. If you enjoyed this game, then all power to you. Everyone has different opinions, and I'm not trying to change yours. Lots of people like this game. I'm just not one of those people.